Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 90. Can't believe we made it to 90. But I'm delighted today to be rejoined by a former guest on the podcast, Matthew Jones, sports nutritionist. Matthew, thanks for coming back on.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation, Ben. I must admit, when I was invited back, I thought, it's better live up to the expectations and try and deliver some goods.
No, we said at the time, mate, there was so much we could dive into, and sort of reflecting on the last podcast, it was jam-packed. And if anyone's not listened, I'm pretty sure it was episode 79, so you can go back and have a listen to that. And you can go into Matthew's background, who he's working with, and all that sort of stuff on that podcast as well. We're not going to take up time going into that on this one because we've got some really good stuff to run through. But yeah, we had to get you back on to touch on a few more things, mate. But just first of all, it's been a few weeks. We're still in lockdown, even though we're eased up a little bit. But how's things been for you?
Yeah, been busy as ever, Ben. I mean, obviously as a consultant, it's quite challenging working with different squads, but then also working with squads that are in lockdown adds another layer of complexity for sure. And I mean, the whole restart thing is been really challenging, to be honest. The logistical side of like food provision and food service, and ensuring that whole thing is safe. And then obviously the environmental factors as well. So now it's pretty hot right now, and it's players have got that added layer of complexity as well. So in terms of providing the suitable interventions and delivering those interventions within the confines of me working from home and the limitations that are in place in regards to the restrictions and everything around the virus has been really challenging, but it's been exciting nonetheless. Obviously it's a new challenge to overcome, so it's been quite stimulating, and obviously you learn from every environment and every new challenge you face.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of this period, like working with players, there must have been a few challenges that have cropped up along the way, because players have essentially been locked in houses, and albeit probably quite nice houses, but at the same time, they're left to their own devices in many ways, aren't they? And it's hard to get out. It's hard to get food on the go and things that they might normally do. So what's some things that you've faced?
Yeah, so in the initial stages, we were arranging the delivery of either pre-prepared meals. So they were offered the opportunity to have like pre-prepared meals, but then they were also offered the opportunity to have like vegetable boxes and fruit boxes and things like that delivered to their houses. And I must admit that most of the players went with the vegetable boxes because they kind of wanted to spend the time making meals with their family and things like that during the lockdown period. Because so as I mentioned last time, I think most of the players that I work with anyway use the time quite constructively and honed their cooking skills, which has been nice. In terms of like the challenges, I think one of the big things that we've noticed is like a slight reduction in lean body mass, especially in the lower body, because they were just kind of running all the time, and probably not getting enough of a stimulus in the lower body. So obviously that's not really my area, but that's something that on reflection that if this happens again, we probably need to look at. But as I say, most players responded quite well to the whole scenario, and they were asking some really good questions because football was taken away from them, so all they had to think about was running and eating. So they were 100% invested in nutrition and definitely used their time wisely.
That's good to hear, because it's definitely a time that we can do that, can't we? We can learn new skills, and it's a time we can practice. And I think the important bit that you mentioned there, probably the most important bit of all, is players spending time with family. And because this is time where normally they'd be training, they'd be off playing in away games and potentially traveling to Europe and places like that. So it's really important, isn't it, that they've used that time, like anyone in any job, to spend with family and create those relationships and make those relationships stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. The psychological aspect was really important as well, especially for like West Ham, the team that I was playing with. It was getting to a stage in the season where the pressure cooker was ramping up, and to step away from that and take some time to gain some perspective on life has been quite nice for them. So yeah, I think they're now ready to step back in and continue the battle.
And we put it out after the last podcast to say any reflections from people and any questions. And one of the first questions that cropped up, I think from Stephen Shaw, was about budget constraints and your recommendations. Now, this will cross over to amateur coaches, amateur players, semi-professional, or even lower league, football league clubs or players as well. So can you go into some advice that you'd give to people in that sort of situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I must admit, I've not really been in a situation where there's like a massive budget issue. I've been kind of unfortunate or fortunate, whatever way you look at it, to be kind of blessed with a relatively large budget on most occasions. So I can't really talk from experience here, but I can definitely give some kind of recommendations on my thought process around what I would do and how I would handle it. So I think what was his name, Steve? I think he mentioned obviously education, and that would be the obvious answer, because obviously it's minimum resources. But I think sometimes we get kind of carried away with the impact of education. Obviously, education becomes a key part of what we do as nutrition practitioners, but I think we often overstate the importance of it. And if we look at the research, like, knowledge does not always equal action. So if I take myself as an example, during this lockdown period, I know that going for a run every day was probably a good idea, but I didn't do it. So yeah, knowing and doing are two like completely different things, really. And if we like just solely focus on education, then I think we're kind of we're kind of missing out on a number of other important aspects. So if we think about like what actually influences food intake, so then we can probably start to develop a better understanding of how we can develop an intervention and how economic factors might influence things. So obviously, in terms of like food intake, we've got biological factors like taste and appetite and things like that, and then physical factors like access to food and skill, and education is one of those as well. And then you have social factors as well, which can be like family, friends, and the culture. And then you got psychological factors, so mood and stress and things like that. And then finally, you got economic factors. So if we just focus on the economic aspects, so the cost of food and the availability of food, then I think we kind of have to then prioritize. So we have to kind of develop a list of importance, basically, and at the bottom of the nutrition pyramid of importance, we have energy requirements. So just meeting your daily energy requirements, that's the most important part. And so above that, we have like macronutrient requirements, so meeting your requirements for carbohydrate, protein, and fat. And then above that, we have meal timing, and then right at the top of the pyramid, you have supplements. So if we were in a situation where obviously we didn't necessarily have a huge budget, then we definitely have to focus on the important aspects, the most significant aspects, which are obviously meeting those energy requirements and meeting the macronutrient requirements. And then we could probably sacrifice some of the supplements that may or may not work, because ultimately, if you get the bottom layers of that pyramid right, you're probably 70, 80, maybe even 90% of the way there. And then certain supplements are just like the icing on the cake, if you like. So I know that's easier said than done. So I guess if I was to like run through that, obviously it really depends on the budget of the club. But if I was to kind of make some suggestions, then breakfast at the club could be provided. It could be like over the oat pots, like Quaker oats, so simple, those small pots. I think they're pretty low cost, and if you have them with some milk or some Greek yogurt and frozen berries, and you make it into like a compote of some sort with honey and things like that, then obviously you're going to get some the carbohydrate component prior to training, and then the protein as well. And then obviously, if you need additional calories, then peanut butter can be kind of an additional calorie source. And again, that meal is probably as low cost as you're going to get. So if you are able to provide a meal prior to training, then that's a pretty good option, I would say. And then during training itself, obviously you could probably sacrifice the supplements during training, because the reality is not that you probably won't need them. So carbohydrate sports drinks are only really going to benefit in fasted athletes or in athletes that are training over 70 minutes at like high intensities, of course. So there was a paper back in I think it was 2013 by an author called Colombani, I think his name was, and they basically did a really nice study to analyze the effects of carbohydrate sports drinks in non-fasted athletes. So athletes that kind of reflect, or circumstances that reflect the real world. So they got the participant, well, they basically reviewed all the carbohydrate research and found that carbohydrate intake during exercise was only really beneficial when players didn't consume breakfast, or when they completed exercise that's over 70 minutes. And I don't think that paper gets as much airtime as it needs, really, because obviously you've got companies like Gatorade and Lucozade that are really, really big into sports drinks. So that paper is certainly interesting, and it basically highlights the fact that if a player is consuming a good carbohydrate-rich breakfast, then the reality is they don't need the sports drink during training. So again, on a low budget, that really helps, and water pretty much will suffice in that circumstance. And I mean, nowadays it's common for players to like or prefer flavored drinks. So the electrolyte tablets, they're going to be beneficial for their taste rather than the electrolytes they provide, because especially here in England, again, the diet should cover all your electrolyte needs in these conditions. And then post-exercise, again, there's probably no need to have a recovery product if you can eat a meal within an hour, perhaps. And again, if the budget allows, then you can provide some food, or you can even kind of arrange a deal with like a local caterer, or like a local food truck or something like that, and have their brand on around the stadium, their logos around the stadium, and they provide food like at cost price or something like that. And I guess it's good exposure for the company, but then also great for the club as well. And they can come in and obviously produce like a healthy post-match meal, or sorry, post-training meal. I think actually James Moorhen did that or something similar to that with Warrington Wolves. I think he I've seen him do that, so I kind of took the idea from him. And obviously I'm not 100% sure, but I guess they have like a relatively low budget in comparison to many football clubs. So it's that's certainly a good idea. And then obviously when players are at home, you could probably do the same with local greengrocers or butchers or fishmongers. You know, you could get them to like provide food boxes or fresh fruit and vegetables to players if they are allowed to advertise around the stadium or around the training ground, and things like that. And you could probably do the same with local supermarkets as well. So if you develop weekly shopping lists and guarantee that you can provide 30 players and their families into their shops every week, what discount can you provide us, or something like that. So yeah, I guess prioritize, go kind of really focus on what matters, which is the daily diet and the food first approach, and meeting nutritional needs, and then just becoming really, really good at that, really. Just really refining the food service and ensuring that the diet is good. And then obviously there are certain circumstances where supplements will be useful, and I mean, like around game time, for instance, and during the winter, vitamin D might be valuable. Well, it certainly will be valuable. So yeah, but I think that prioritize, and then yeah, ensure that the food service is good and managed as best possible.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. In terms of the supplements as well, it's one thing that a lot of people will turn to straight away, isn't it? If they're looking for that extra bit out of their nutrition approach. And like you say, it's really the cherry on top, isn't it? Like, we need a lot of other things in place first. So just to go into it, because we might be speaking to coaches here in that situation, but we might also be speaking to some players that might be playing semi-professional or even amateur, or even professional. But what are some of the basics that you'd be looking at? So you've talked about sort of energy requirements and that, but have you got some specifics in terms of like the first point of call that you go to?
Yeah, well, I guess the real fundamental aspects are just eating three meals a day, 3 square meals a day, and then like a football player will need to snack in between as well, because their energy expenditure is probably like 2,900 to maybe 3,500, something like that. And if they're semi-professional, then it's going to be even higher than that, because they have the job stress as well, or the job activity energy expenditure. So yeah, three meals a day. Each of those meals has to contain some form of protein, a carbohydrate, so what you'd call like a quote unquote balanced meal, and then aiming for like 10 servings of fruit and vegetables a day. So if you set the bar high, then you're at least going to try and hit the minimum of 5, but yeah, I think trying to hit 10 a day, so that's like 3 with the meals, and then the rest with snacks in mid-afternoon, and then prior to sleep as well. So yeah, within like a general kind of rule would be, if you had a plate, the palm of your hand, if you put the palm of your hand on your plate, you kind of fill that space with a protein-rich food. So meat, fish, eggs, chickpeas, lentils, or like a dairy product of some sort. And then you put your hand on your plate and you fill that space with a carbohydrate, like a starchy carbohydrate. And then the rest of the space is kind of filled with like a boost food, or a fruit or a vegetable of some kind. And if you repeat that 3 times, then I think you're going to be, that's going to be like 3 basic good meals, if you like. And then in between those, then yeah, snacking on, it really depends on your energy requirements, but it could be something like oat biscuits, rice cakes, again, fruits, vegetables. Before bed, yogurt is a really good protein source, and it digests quite slowly, so it can help support overnight recovery. And obviously you can add some more fruit to that as well, and nuts and things like that if you have higher calorie requirements. So yeah, just making sure that those 3 meals are good, and they're kind of on point, if you like. And then from there, if you're consistent with that, I think, yeah, you won't be far wrong.
Awesome. And then looking more into like periodization now as well. One thing I was going to ask actually was, and this might tie into periodization too, is you might see some players that are targeting more protein and fat in certain meals. So is there any point that you would use that approach with players? So like you talked about breakfast before, getting carbohydrate sources in the breakfast. Would there be any point that you would focus more on like a protein and fat approach, or were you saying with the energy requirements that we need more carbohydrate?
Yeah, I mean, the primary fuel for football will be carbohydrate. So like in season, that's always going to be the priority, really, especially in the earlier part of the day. So they're going to be like, if they're a professional player, they're going to be training in the morning. So in terms of fueling that session, then breakfast definitely has to feature a relatively large quantity of carbohydrate, and then afterwards to recover and refuel. Later in the day, it could probably be tapered down, but they have such elevated carbohydrate needs that there still needs to be a carbohydrate in that evening meal. Just the glycemic index might change a little bit. So you might have things like quinoa, couscous, potatoes, and sweet potatoes and things like that in the evening. Whereas like towards the start of the day, it could be like a higher glycemic carbohydrate, like potentially like well done pasta or mashed potatoes, or yeah, spaghetti and breads and things like that.
Yeah, that's cool. And then in terms of like periodization, if we could go into that, Matt, as well. So first of all, what we mean, because we were talking just before we started recording, a lot of people know about periodization when we talk about training, but when we talk about nutrition, there'll probably be a lot of people thinking, periodization, how does that fit into nutrition? So can you just give a bit of a general definition of that to start with?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you say, most people are aware of like training periodization and how to do it and how to manage it and how to measure it as well. So pretty simply, nutritional periodization is basically just aligning nutrition with training periodization. So obviously, as training is periodized, so you get higher intensity training days or load increases on certain days. Certain days you have like rest days, for instance. And then you have like lower intensity training days. So essentially that impacts the energy requirements and two, the macronutrient requirements as well. So yeah, it's just basically matching the diet and ensuring that it meets the day's objective. And objectives could be kind of broadly defined or broadly categorized as like preparation, recovery, performance, and then potentially even adaptation days. So you've got like a day where the objective is to prepare for the game, another one that could be like performance related, the next one recovery related, and then the fourth one would be like adaptations. And adaptations more like in pre-season, but in certain contexts you can also get an adaptation day in like the middle of the week, like a Tuesday or a Wednesday, for instance. And so yeah, I think Asker, you can came up with a definition actually for nutritional periodization, and he kind of broadly defined it as the strategic combined use of exercise and training and nutrition, or nutrition only, with the objective to obtain adaptations and support performance. So yeah, it's basically just aligning nutrition with the day's objective, or the day's training objective.
So from a sports science or an S&C point of view, that might really tie in with certain times of the season. But like you mentioned there, certain times of the week. So if we did a really high intensive day, how would that differ to your approach? And I suppose tying that in with, if there's one person in control of training and nutrition, what are some things that they need to be aware of? If there's not a nutritionist at the club and a sports scientist at the club, if it's just one person, what do they need to be aware of on those days?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess before we begin, like periodization of nutrition in football is quite challenging, and to the untrained eye, you might not even be able to notice a difference, to be honest, because basically the energy requirements in football are not extreme, if you like. So in an endurance athlete, you can go like upwards of like 10,000 calories a day, right the way down to maybe like 2,500 calories a day on like a complete day off, for instance. So there's like two extremes there, and then obviously the energy requirements there are completely different. So if you saw a plate of food or like a periodized approach within that like context, you'll notice a huge difference. Whereas in football, it's much smaller, and so the energy requirements, although they do change, it might, to the untrained eye, the plate of food probably looks pretty much the same. It's just the kind of the really fine details that like trained nutritionists or dietitians can really notice. So when I often talk about like the periodized approach to like sports science staff or things like that, and they're like, yeah, I understand it, but sometimes I can't really see it. So yeah, you have to really, and I guess as we go into this a little bit more, you'll start to understand like how and why you can't necessarily see it. So if Saturday, and so you've got obviously Saturday game, and then like potentially recovery day on the Sunday, and Monday training, Tuesday training, Wednesday off, and then training Thursday, Friday, and then another game on Saturday. You could kind of, if we like align the training periodization and to certain objectives. So obviously performance is the primary objective on the Saturday. Sunday would be like a recovery. Monday would be kind of potentially recovery as well. Tuesday, that's where some clubs might have the overload day. And then on that day, that's where we see the increases in load and increases in like intense action. So if we like revert back to like exercise physiology, we know that anytime that we do any intense action, then carbohydrate oxidation increases. So you burn more carbohydrate. you'll also burn more calories because you're just moving further and for longer. So yeah, increasing energy intake on those days and from carbohydrate is going to be really, really important, because on those days there is an increased need or increased requirement for carbohydrate.
I know it's probably hard to answer this specifically, Matt, but I'm just trying to think about the sort of questions that people will be asking at this time. So in terms of that increase of carbohydrate, what would you like practically be recommending? So if someone had like a jacket potato on the plate, is it a case of having that portion again, or how would that look? I know it probably depend on the player.
Yeah, absolutely. It's as you say, it's widely kind of dictated by the player's preference, really, and in what type of food that they prefer. But if we take we take that week that I've just kind of outlined there. So Monday we'd be looking at like a moderate carbohydrate intake of like maybe 4 grams per kilogram, and then Tuesday it would be like a slightly higher 6 grams per kilogram. Wednesday would be like the off day, so it would be like a low day, so it would be like 3 grams per kilogram carbohydrate, and then it kind of ramps back up all the way up to 8 grams per kilogram on like the match day -1 and then match day. So if we're looking at for an outfield player anyway, for a goalkeeper, they're probably kind of more in the moderate range across all days, because as you're aware, game day for a goalkeeper is probably like a rest day almost. They kind of get battered during training. But
the goalkeepers
kind of going
union
back
are going to be after you there, Matt. They're going to be coming after you with that.
Yeah, sorry, I'm confident there. But no, let me put it out there. They work incredibly hard during training, so that hopefully that gets me some brownie points. Yeah, so going back to the point. So if we think about like an 80 kilogram like outfield player, if they need to consume like 8 grams per kilogram of carbohydrate on match day -1, so that's roughly 640 grams of carbohydrate. So if we kind of developed a meal plan for them, like a theoretical meal plan, that could be something like porridge with honey at breakfast, like a pretty large serving of porridge with honey, and then also some toast with an omelette, and a smoothie at breakfast. So like a fairly substantial breakfast, and then a sports drink during training or after training. I know I previously said that it probably not going to benefit, but during training it can offset glycogenolysis, so it can prevent the breakdown of glycogen. So, and it can also top up carbohydrate intake in that context. So in other contexts it's probably not really that useful, but match day -1 it will be. Then we go on to lunch. That could be like a soup with bread roll, and then a moderate to large serving of rice perhaps. And then afterwards you probably have to have like a healthy dessert, maybe like a muffin or something like that, or like an in-house rice cake. Then mid-afternoon you're probably going to have another carbohydrate rich snack, which could be like a rice cake and a banana with some honey on it. You're probably going to have like 3 of those, to be honest. And then in the evening meal, there could be like a large serving of like spaghetti bolognese with fruit juice, and we typically provide like a dessert like rice pudding with something like a rhubarb and berry compote to go with it, again just to add some more carbohydrate. And then again, like prior to sleep is another opportunity. So you've probably got another 100 grams of carbohydrate that you need to consume. So adding a carbohydrate rich meal before you go to bed is probably going to be required as well. So that could be like a bowl of Rice Krispies, or like a light cereal of some kind, and then some dried fruits, perhaps like a handful of dried apricots. So it's a considerable amount of carbohydrate, and to be honest, it's no wonder that not many players can actually kind of attain that. Not many. And if we look at the research and we look at like observationally, like when I see players on the day before a game, they can't get anywhere near that, to be honest. They could, and if we look at like Liam Anderson's research, he kind of reported that close to like 4 to 4.5 grams per kilogram in the day before a game. And like the gold standard right now, the gold standard recommendation is 8 grams per kilogram. So it's like almost double that. And you imagine trying to get a player to eat that breakfast, so like a large bowl of porridge with honey and then toast and an omelette as well, and a smoothie. before they go to train, that it's probably not going to happen. So we have to be creative in ways in which we get that additional carbohydrate into them. Obviously they prefer feeling quite light, and they don't like going into training like full and feeling heavy and things like that. So maximizing the opportunities like mid-afternoon and then before they go to bed is highly recommended. And that's something that we've kind of been refining and working on. Yeah, so it's a considerable amount of carbohydrate on that day that they require. But we know that there's a big mismatch between like the gold standard recommendations and what is actually happening right now. There's a huge difference in that. And there was, I think there was a meta-analysis back in 2019. It showed the average carbohydrate intake of a footballer is close to like 4.5 to 5 grams per kilogram a day, which it's way off. And kind of the worrying thing is it actually reduces as they get to the first team. So there's like it's a little bit higher in the academy ages. In those age groups, it's probably like closer to 6 grams per kilogram. Still not really high, but as they get older, the carbohydrate intake seems to reduce. And I guess you could speculate there's a number of reasons for that. Like I guess as they get older, they might have like wives and girlfriends, and they're exposed to different media messages, and maybe they go out for breakfast in London. They go to like the fancy cafes where they have like avocado toast and things like that. So their fat intake will increase, but their carbohydrate intake will reduce, whereas they might previously have had like a bowl of cereal or something, and then all of a sudden it's been replaced with still a healthy meal, but in their kind of context, it's not necessarily as good, perhaps. So it's not necessarily that they're eating like bad things. It's probably just in certain contexts or circumstances they're eating like the wrong things, I guess.
And you mentioned a time where I'm sure there's many myths around this time in terms of before bed. Should I eat? Should I not eat? Do we eat a lot? Like you hear a lot of different things, don't you, at that time? And it's one that a lot of people will question. So, and we've got to make, like you said, context is really key. We're talking about footballers here. We're not talking about general population. We're talking about strictly footballers. But even still, you must get a lot of questions about that time, like should I eat before bed? So what's your general thoughts around that if someone was to question that?
Yeah, again, going back to the context thing, it's really important. And the only time that I would recommend like eating carbohydrate prior to bed would probably be the day before a game, just because we need to like make the most of every feeding opportunity, and that is an opportunity to top up carbohydrate and top up glycogen prior to sleep. I've actually spoken to like Shona Halson about this as well, and she's kind of agrees. We kind of both came up with a strategy at Chelsea Women, whereby we do kind of encourage carbohydrate intake prior to sleep, but not too close to sleep. So maybe like 2 hours before they go to bed, maybe even a little bit more than that. So yeah, just in that context, yes. In others, then a protein-rich meal prior to sleep. So it could be like a yogurt with berries and nuts and seeds and things like that would be the ideal recommendation. But I guess one of the issues that I've also faced is in certain circumstances on game day, players won't consume breakfast. So they'll wake up, they'll maybe extend sleep, and then if they've got like a 3 o'clock kickoff, the first meal of the day will be like the pre-match meal, which could be anywhere between like 11 and 12, anywhere between that, depending on the coach and the player as well. So yeah, they'll often skip breakfast. So that's another opportunity there where glycogen is kind of dropped a little bit overnight. Maybe 70 grams of carbohydrate from the liver is kind of gone. So yeah, making the most of that pre-bed opportunity to maximize carbohydrate intake can almost not completely offset that issue of not waking up for breakfast. And especially in the professional game like breakfast at most clubs that I've worked at, to be honest, has been like an optional. It's not been compulsory, so it's there, but you can come if you want. And but you don't have to. And many players don't. So now we have to kind of have snacks and things available in their rooms to make sure that they're getting that additional carbohydrate. Because what we don't know is if they skip breakfast, are they able to compensate for that like later in the day? And that's not only calories, but it's also protein, it's also carbohydrate. And obviously, if they're doing that over the course of a season, like 50 games a year, maybe more, what impact is that having? Like if they're in a negative energy balance on game day, what impact is that having on recovery and immune function and all that kind of thing? If they're unable to compensate for the missed energy, and the likelihood is after games they're probably not able to compensate. We know that appetite is suppressed after games, and so it's unlikely in the after a game they're able to compensate for that missed energy at breakfast. So yeah, going back to the point, I wouldn't always recommend carbohydrate before bed. In fact, that would probably be the only time that I would recommend it, and it wouldn't be like immediately before bed. It would be a few hours prior.
I think it'd be great as well to dive into that game day a little bit more, because you mentioned there about some players not eating, essentially fasting in the morning. So just first of all, do you think that comes from media, from the sort of popularity that fasting seems to be getting, intermittent fasting, or do you think that's just generally that players don't like to have the feeling of having full stomachs and feeling lighter, like you said before?
Yeah, I think there's a number of factors really. Like we did like a brief survey on the players that we were working with, just to try and find out why they weren't eating breakfast, and there was a number of different reasons. Like the most commonly cited reason was that it was too close to the pre-match meal. So you can imagine if like breakfast on game day would be maybe like, I don't know, 9 o'clock, and then the pre-match meal would be like 11:30, well, between 11:30 and 12. So it is quite close, and it's so yeah, that was the most commonly cited reason. And another one was I prefer to sleep in. I don't go to bed. I find it quite difficult to go to bed. So if I extend it a little bit, I can kind of get the required quantity of sleep that I need, and that is quite hard to argue with that. And yeah, there was a few different reasons, but they were kind of genuine reasons. You know, they were most of them were kind of geared towards the fact that the player wanted to feel better and comfortable, more comfortable during the game, not necessarily like anything around like the benefits of fasting or anything like that.
And then in terms of that game day, like what are some other considerations we need to make up until kickoff and then also straight after the game?
Yeah, so if we think about like the game day itself, again, carbohydrate is going to be really important. So again, one thing I noticed is many players find it difficult to meet carbohydrate requirements in that pre-match meal. So you could have a target of like anywhere between like 2 to 2.5 grams per kilogram of carbohydrate in that meal, and so we're probably talking like 160 grams of carbohydrate, and that's quite challenging for them. One, they don't have an appetite if they're playing against like a big club, then like in front of a lot of people on live TV, then yeah, your appetite somehow gets sucked out of you. So and I guess staff can vouch for that as well. It kind of happens to everyone, not just the players. And then you're trying to encourage them to eat like a large bowl of pasta or a large bowl of rice and a piece of like toast or with jam or something like that, and apple juice. Then it sometimes doesn't align. You know, it's so making the most of like every opportunity prior to that is really, really important. So yeah, I mean, the priority within that pre-match meal would be carbohydrate, but it's also important to have like a balance. So so we know that protein can kind of support in terms of like managing blood glucose levels. So it kind of slows down the digestion of foods. It helps in that regards, but then it also helps to optimize neurotransmitters as well. So like the chemical signals in your brain and things like that. So in terms of making you feel more alert and things like that, if you have like a large dosage of carbohydrate on its own, you can get an increase in serotonin, which can make you feel quite lethargic. So it's important to have like a balance, and some protein and some vegetables as well, some higher fiber foods, to provide some amino acids to optimize the cognitive elements as well. And as you get closer to the game, well, hydration is a pretty important part of that as well, the pre-match meal. And then obviously as you get closer to the game, the emphasis is still on carbohydrate and fluids, so fueling and things like that. But the food probably changes slightly, and it goes to like more simple things like liquid-based things within an hour. And then we actually have like a system whereby we like make meal tickets for players. So we take their like favorite food, and then we take their requirements and basically make a little meal ticket for them. So it's more of like a table service rather than like a buffet style, because again, going back to like observations, you see many players eating almost way too much, and then some players not eating enough at all. And that's basically stems from the fact that they don't know what to eat. And sometimes obviously the psychological aspects as well. So we basically just make a meal ticket for them, and they have it on their phone so they can just refer to it every pre-match meal, and they eat pretty much the same thing every pre-match meal. So it's pretty simple in that regards. And then we have the same for the game itself. So we don't want to change too much there, because obviously if you start changing things, you can get some gastrointestinal issues and stuff. So they have like a fueling card as well, which is like published on the inside of their changing space, if you like. It's just on the side of the wall, and it's basically like a timeline. Well, you need to have this here, you need to have this here, and they have like one side of it is for if they start the game, and then the other side is if they're a substitute. So obviously the type of food and fluid that they have is going to be different. So the glycemic index will be slightly different. It'll be like a slow fuel, if you like, if they're a substitute, and more of a fast fuel if they're starting the game. And then after the game, so obviously the emphasis then quickly changes to recovery. So I have like a 5R principle of recovery. So most people have heard of like the 3 R's. Well, I have like refuel with carbohydrate, rehydrate with fluid, repair muscle or rebuild muscle with protein, and then reduce inflammation and oxidative stress with anti-inflammatories and antioxidants. And then the 5th one is like rest and relax. So obviously most people have heard of like the refueling, so carbohydrate feeding regularly in the immediate aftermath, or the first like 3 to 4 hours after a game, and that can be quite challenging, really, because again, we're looking at really large dosages, like 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram of carbohydrate every hour almost after a game. And you can imagine if you've just chased like Mo Salah or Roberto Firmino around the pitch for the last 90 minutes, you're not going to fancy that much carbohydrate, especially not every hour for the next 4 hours. So again, it's a real practical challenge of overcoming that. So you have to really focus on foods that they enjoy, so flavors that they like. So that's where you can really get into flavor preferences. So you can start to adjust the drink around what they like, and like the typical recovery drink is like a whey protein with like a carbohydrate of some sort, and it's quite thick and heavy. And one thing that we've noticed is in recent years is that like a lighter, like a fruit flavored drink is much more like preferable, and it works as well, if not better, because obviously they're consuming it. So yeah, we started to kind of refine that like phase 1 recovery, which is like the liquid, and then like phase 2 recovery would be like a post-match meal of some sort. I know like culturally that differs from club to club. Some clubs now have like sit-down meals, which is pretty amazing. And then myself, like my clubs, they have like more like finger food, like buffet style. So and then phase 3 would be kind of like later on in the evening, and then phase 4 would be like before bed for like a 3 o'clock kickoff, for instance. And so yeah, so that would be like the recovery thing. So I guess the one thing that people, as I mentioned, most people have heard of like refueling with carbohydrate and rehydrating and things like that. And they've probably heard of repairing muscle as well. But the ones that they might not have heard of is the reducing oxidative stress and inflammation, and then also rest and relax. So obviously I know that nutrition can't necessarily directly influence like resting and relaxing, and I'm kind of a little bit unsure of anything that can actually promote sleep or anything like that. So but I definitely food or nutrition can definitely indirectly influence the feelings of like resting and relaxing. So things like having a live chef in the changing rooms after a game. Like I know Arsenal have a pretty high profile chef like making the post-match meals and stuff, and that basically quickly turns the attention away from the game to, oh wow, there's a chef making amazing food in my meal, in my changing rooms, and that can overcome some of the things that are the players thinking about the poor referee decision, or he's pissed off because he missed an open goal or something like that, and it can quickly divert the attention away from that and get them to like kind of rest and relax, I guess. And it's more of the psychological component. Another aspect is going out for meals with friends and family, and kind of getting away from football. Again, that can really help psychologically. And if you go to like your favorite restaurant, that can really help. And so we try and encourage players to go out with family and friends and just kind of enjoy the meal and enjoy the food, and that can help with that rest and relaxation part. And obviously after a heavy defeat, it's probably not a good idea. You might bump into some mad fans. And then obviously prior to sleep, there's things that you can do to support, or not necessarily promote sleep, but create a better environment. Things like tryptophan and maybe even carbohydrate again, magnesium and some nootropics as well that can help with promoting sleep. So although nutrition probably doesn't directly impact rest and relaxation, it can certainly indirectly influence things.
Awesome, mate. And I think it'd be great just to touch on as well, with a lot of players going back into games and what is potentially going to be a very heavy work schedule now as well. What are some key things we need to consider with that change from, obviously they've still been training, but they're going onto a much higher workload, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to the pyramid of importance again, so the energy requirements are going to increase. So one, they're going to have to increase the quantity of food that they're consuming, but the likelihood is they're going to be requiring more carbohydrate now because they're going to be moving at higher intensities. So yeah, the changes that they make to their meals are primarily going to be around the carbohydrate space. So if you imagine like the general example I gave of like putting your hand on the plate, it might now be like you need like 2 hands on your plate of carbohydrate and things like that. So just adjusting the serving size of carbohydrate to reflect the requirements of the new schedule. And it's a real challenge because obviously you need to kind of pick up that or adapt and get fit quite quickly. You'll match fit quite quickly, but then you also need to like maximize recovery as well within a short space of time. So yeah, just focusing on the energy component and then the macronutrient component and adjusting carbohydrate intake to reflect those changing demands is going to be the most important part, definitely. And then with the environmental stress, then just keeping up on hydration and just making sure that your pee is nearly see-through consistently, and drinking consistently. Yeah.
Awesome, mate. And then we said about practical interventions, but to be fair, I think you've touched on a lot of that already. Was there anything else that you wanted to go into with that?
Yeah, to be honest, I think the other one was probably halftime. I probably skipped past that. And to be honest, Mark Russell, Dr. Mark Russell over at Leeds Trinity, he's kind of changed the game in this area. I actually owe him a testimonial. We've been talking about this since 2015, and he's really shaped my practice in this regards. And so his work has been incredible. And people in that area of like Liam Harper and things like that, they've done a real great job of investigating like halftime practices and the practices of like optimizing halftime and optimizing like substitutions and extra time and things like that. There's been really great research in those areas in the last few years. So I think if you refer back to Mark's paper from I think it was 2015, he looked at basically making a timeline. He took the 15-minute halftime period and looked at ways in which we can optimize that. So basically, the first 10 minutes were kind of spent with the team talks, like the tactical stuff, getting a rollicking if you need to, and addressing your boots and hair, which is quite important, obviously, and rehydrating as well. So in initial 10 minutes, like taking off fluids and electrolytes, and then in the final 10 minutes, that's when the carbohydrate comes in. So so you have like gels, and then maybe even like caffeine gum and stuff like that as well. And basically, Mark's research came off the back of, like, one of his findings was that many players were experiencing rebound hypoglycemia in the second half. So basically, where blood glucose goes up rapidly and then it drops quite considerably as well. And he noticed there was like almost like a 30 or 40% drop in blood glucose around 60 minutes after that period of half time. So he was looking at ways in which he could optimize that period. And he again came up with that kind of timeline, and I've actually utilized it, and it works well. Like, I don't have any objective data to support that, but I know that players respond well to it, and it works practically because the first 10 minutes you've given to the coach to address tactics and the players to address equipment and things like that, and then you walk around with the carbohydrate and the caffeine gum and things like that. And so yeah, I think that would be one of the practical interventions that I kind of missed out on during the game day. But yeah, I think the other ones, like the recovery, just focusing on the 5 R's, and just going back to the periodization thing. I think that would be another practical intervention, really, that people should probably try and work on or focus on. And in terms of football, as I said, it is quite difficult. If you think carbohydrate requirements go from like 6 grams per kilogram down to like 4 grams per kilogram, the likelihood is the untrained eye is probably not going to be able to notice the difference. So that could be like a plate of pasta versus like a plate of couscous or quinoa or something like that. You know, it's not like it's quite difficult to detect. But there is a difference, like, in the nutritional values of those meals. You know, you can change from like a large serving spoon to a tablespoon, for instance. So a large serving spoon of pasta could be like 30-40 grams of carbohydrate, whereas like a tablespoon, if you serve couscous with a tablespoon, it could be like 5 or 6 grams of carbohydrate. And the likelihood is you're not going to sit there and put like 10 serving spoons. So just making like really small subtle changes that the player is not really going to notice, that can really help help you apply that periodized approach within the practical setting. But yeah, as I say, it is quite challenging because the energy expenditures of footballers is not that high, and it's not really helped by the fact that they're quite sedentary outside of football. I think that one of my colleagues at West Ham did some research in that area and found that 79% of players' time outside of football is spent in sedentary activity. So like sitting down, watching TV and things like that. So you can imagine that's not necessarily helping the fact that they already have like fairly moderate energy expenditures, and then trying to apply those really high carbohydrate intakes can be quite challenging as well, again from a body composition perspective. So if you imagine you're like preparing for a game and promoting carbohydrate intakes of like 8 grams per kilogram across a squad of outfield players, what if they don't play? That's like 4,000 calories. That's like nearly 1,000 calorie surplus on that day. Then that brings up the conversations of, okay, well, do we need to run them after games? Do we need to train match day +1 or just that group? And so it brings up some really big questions like that kind of involve obviously the multidisciplinary team. But in terms of managing body composition and body weight, it can be challenging as well. So yeah, there's a few things there.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think the whole body fat, body weight would have been something that players would have had to keep an eye on in this period and be wary of in this period as well, isn't it? With the probably the lower load in terms of training. So yeah, I think there's some really good points there. Matt, I think this has been another top podcast, to be fair, mate. I think there's been loads of stuff there. The main 3 areas we wanted to cover. Was there anything else you wanted to go into?
No. Thank you very much, Ben. Yeah, it's always great to chat, and I'm sure we could have gone on more, but yeah, it's nice. Great. Thank you very much for the invitation back.
No, thanks for coming on, mate. Really appreciate it. And just want to remind people of your Twitter, where they can get hold of you.
Yeah, so social media, Twitter, I always forget, I think it's Matt Jones NC, N for nutrition, and then a C for something random, I can't even remember. And then Instagram, I think, to be honest, I'm not even sure what that is.
I'll have a look and I'll post them for you.
Yeah, and then we blog. So myself and my former colleague Jace Delaney have a blog, and it's called Sport Perfects. www.sportperfx.com, and we've got some relatively interesting things on there, I guess.
Brilliant, mate.
Well, we have it.
I'll put all those links in the show notes so they can go and follow you. And I would say, if you're not listening to episode 79 as well, the previous one that Matthew did, there's loads of information on that as well. So, but I just want to say thank you for coming back on, mate. It's been great to catch up again.
No worries. Likewise, Ben. Thanks for the invitation, and we'll chat soon, I'm sure. Thank you very much.
Definitely, mate. Speak to you soon.